Cool. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Joey. I'm going to talk about writing good and friendly code, and then I'll kind of slowly move into code reviews as well towards the end of the presentation. If you want to download the slides, they're at slides.jkudish.com if you later want to review them or anything like that. As you may notice, I don't have an Australian accent. I'm from Canada. This is Vancouver. That's where I'm from. Yeah, it's a nice city. One of the best cities to live in, as is Melbourne. So kind of a good mix living here for a few months and then going back home to Vancouver. Both really, really good cities. I work for Automattic. That's the parent company behind WordPress.com, Jetpack, WordPress, Akismet, and a few other kind of services related to the WordPress ecosystem. We're really big open source contributors, and we're a distributed company. So we have over 300 people in over 30 countries, 138 cities. And what it means that we're distributed is that we don't have offices. We each work from home or co-working spaces, wherever we like. And we're always hiring. So if any of you are interested, come and talk to either me or Gary later tonight. And we'll be happy to talk to you about some of the positions available at Automattic. So we should talk about what is good code, because that's kind of the meat and potatoes of this talk today. But before we do that, we actually need to talk about what is bad code, so that we understand what some of the things are that we should try to avoid and improve within our code, and the things to watch out for when you're doing code reviews as well. Shortcuts and carelessness during development to save money or time lead to downstream expenses called technical debt that may exceed the upstream savings. That's a quote from Cunningham's Law of Technical Debt. Basically what that means is that if you do something quick and fast, because it'll save you money right here and now, it'll cost you later on in maintenance fees, in debugging problems that you may not have expected, or any kind of other issue. So it's really important to take the time and do things properly from the get-go. As kind of a general statement, bad code is usually the accumulation of multiple shortcuts or concessions that you do in order to kind of build something quickly rather than, as I said, take your time to build things out properly. It's maybe a little bit hard to see, but this is an example of kind of bad code. And I was wondering if anybody could spot some of the things that are kind of wrong in here. Sorry if it's hard to see. Anyone have any ideas? Yeah? OK, so multiple if statements, that's certainly one of them. Probably not the biggest offense here, though. Anyone else? So the biggest one is this if true, which is completely pointless, because true is always true. So that kind of defeats the purpose of having an if statement at all. It just clobbers up the code and makes it harder to read and understand what's happening.
Okay, how many people spotted?
What's that?
How many people spotted?
How many people spotted?
See it,
yeah, well, obviously no one here did. I'll kind of accept that maybe it was hard to see with the lighting in here. The other kind of, it's not a huge issue, but it certainly makes it a bit harder to work with this code is just a bad use of coding standards. This doesn't respect the WordPress coding standards at all. So here, the bracket is on its own line. We don't have spaces between parentheses. There's no space after the exclamation mark here, no spaces in the if statements. So just kind of a disregard towards the coding standards. The next issue is that these functions here kind of have like similar names, and it's not really clear from their names what they actually do or why in these two different scenarios we're calling these two different functions. There's a bunch of comments around here, but I'll just read you this comment. It says, we need to process the content as early as possible to be sure that the DOM tree is identical to the edited one. Also, function accept 2 arguments, so when needed, we can supply exact regions to apply. Like, what does that even mean? And this is code from an actual plugin. It's from an old revision. It's since been improved. But this is the kind of code that you might find in WordPress plugins. And it just doesn't, like, it doesn't really make sense at all. Yeah, so this comment here doesn't really tell us anything. Oh, and one more thing in here. They're using a negative priority to make sure that it runs really early, but it's kind of an excessive number, minus 99,991. They could have just used minus 10, and that would have probably been fine. Oops. I'm gonna go through all the arrows again. This is a case of somebody being a little bit too clever with their code. Does anybody know what var will return here? Any guesses? Anyone? Just, I guess. There's only a few options here, so you should probably be able to guess. What is it?
I'm fairly certain it's food.
No, wrong. So this is actually kind of a quirk of PHP, and the answer is bar. And this is because PHP actually interprets this as adding a parentheses here. So the return of this will be foo, which evaluates to true. And then so it's if true, then return bar instead of baz. So that's what it returns. And this is called a WAT moment. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, there's a really great JavaScript talk by a really funny developer guy. So you should go and check that out on your own time. But basically, WAT is like when you expect something to be a certain way, but it's actually not that way. So kind of that was a bit of an extreme example, but the lesson that I wanted you to get out of this is don't be too clever. So this is a more realistic example of cleverness that you might see in code or in a WordPress plugin. And here what we're doing is grabbing this image name variable, exploding it so that we have new variables in these pieces for each of the parts of the image name string before and after periods. And then we populate this extension array based on the pieces variable. This is a little convoluted. Like, it's not really, you can't really be sure what extension will contain at the end of this operation. So you should be a little bit more careful and kind of make your code more explicit so it's not just, like, this will work in maybe the first time you run it or the first few times that you run the code, but it may not run in the exact way that you intended it to under different environments or different ways that that piece of code might be used. So you have to be careful not to be too clever. Don't repeat yourself, also known as dry. This is an example of somebody setting the current, this class on the body element with the current language. And instead of just using the current language constant, they're actually doing an if for every possibility and then outputting that in the class. So it's basically just a lot of repetition for not a lot of purpose. The next example is just bad naming. This I actually made up. This isn't real code, but here we have a class named C and some variables A and B. And based on some definition of whether this start function exists, we either execute start or execute delayed start over here. So this makes it really hard to actually understand what the hell's going on in this class. So if I instantiate C, it's going to either do start or delayed start. But you wouldn't be able to tell that by just reading the code really quickly. A much better way to write that would have just been check if the function start exists, and if not, run delayed start. So this is actually a combination of being A, too clever, and B, really bad naming for stuff. But you also shouldn't overdo it. I've seen this quite a few times. There's something similar where you kind of just ramble on with the name of the variable. So keep it consistent, keep it clear. Don't make it too short so that you have no idea what it is, but you also don't need to be super verbose about what it does. So this all kind of relates to being a good developer citizen. And I'll kind of show a few more things that you can do to be nice to your fellow developers and also to your users. Some of this stuff you may think, oh, nobody cares, like no one will read my code. But it may actually translate all the way down to your end users as well. One of the important things that you can do as a developer, especially in the WordPress world, especially when creating custom plugins, is to namespace your code properly. There's kind of 3 different ways that you can do that. The first one, which you shouldn't really do in a plugin that you'll release to the general public, because it's a PHP 5.3 and higher version supported feature. However, the WordPress requirement is still PHP 5.2, so you should be careful about that. But it is something you can use for your own projects, or if you decide that your plugin should only support PHP 5.3 and higher. So this is using the PHP feature called Namespace. So what you do here is give it a namespace, and then any functions that you define within that namespace are not part of the global namespace. So in this case, the function speaker would not be available in the global namespace. You would first have to call this WP Meetup namespace. Definitely the most popular way of namespacing your functions is just prepending the name of whatever your project is to your function names. And then the last way of doing this is by wrapping your code into a class and then naming the class something unique, but then the methods within that class you can name whatever you want, since they're not global functions. It's also really important, this is where kind of the user part of this comes in, to be mindful of security. Anyone know what's wrong here? Yeah?
Should be a post of a get command.
There should be what?
Should be a post of a get to your username.
Should be a post on the get command.
Get.
Yeah.
Post.
No, that's fine. What this does is actually pull, like, if the URL was like $user equal 123, then this get user would be 123. Yeah.
It's just you trusting what's in get user.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, I could pass in like a little bit of JavaScript in the URL, and then this would create a cross-site scripting vulnerability on the site. And someone could go and steal your cookies or do bad stuff. So we want to avoid that. And the way we do that in WordPress is by using this handy function called escape attribute. And what that does is it escapes that string so that it's no longer a security concern and can be safely used within an HTML attribute within this element. There's a bunch of other sanitization and escaping functions within WordPress that are provided by core. So you should go and check out the data validation page in the WordPress handbook if you're not familiar with these. I'm not going to cover all of them just because that would be a whole talk in and of itself. Another thing that you can do that will help your users and also other developers who might use your code or look at your code is to use modern techniques and technologies whenever possible. So at some point, technology has to move forward. So you as a developer have a very small responsibility to kind of help move things forward. For example, PHP 5.2, which is still the version supported by WordPress core, is very, very old. It's unsupported by PHP. There are no more security updates for it. So the more developers in the WordPress world who start requiring that new plugins require PHP 5.3 or higher, that'll kind of let hosts know, hey, we don't want our users to use PHP 5.2 anymore. We want them to use 5.3, 5.4, 5.5. And that'll kind of put some pressure on these hosts to get them updated. But one of the laws of software, it's called the law of software evolution, is that software must be continuously updated or it becomes less and less useful. And software entropy or complexity increases over time. So the way that you kind of solve those problems is by keeping up to date and using whatever the latest technologies are available. Of course, there are limits to this. You shouldn't implement something new and shiny just because it's new and shiny. You should use common sense for this. You should provide useful and timely errors. Don't provide like a really obscure error to your users, but also don't provide a super generic error to developers. You should find a good mix of kind of providing the right error in the right context. In WordPress, the common way to do this is to use the WP error object. So if you're not familiar with that, go and check it out. And then in JavaScript, the common way to do this is to output stuff in the console. Probably one of the biggest things that you can do as a good developer citizen is to write good commit messages. People who review your code will go and look at those commit messages. And of course, that means that you should be using version control. So if you're not, that'll be step 0. Go and implement version control in whatever project you're using or working on. And there's kind of a few things that make a commit message a good commit message. It should explain what is the change and why the change was made. It should also go over what caused the problem in the first place and what its consequences were. And it should explain how you're solving that problem, but only if it's not obvious. So if you're fixing a typo, you don't have to like go in super long detail explaining why and how you're fixing that typo. But if you're solving a complicated over-memory usage or something like that, then you should write a long or longer commit message explaining what you did, why there was a problem in the first place, and how you fixed it. Also, kind of related to being a good developer citizen, especially if you work in a team, is to always give props to whoever helped you work on the issue. Even if they didn't write a single piece of code that ended up making it into your commit, if they helped you debug the problem, or they helped you test the problem, or even if they wrote like some documentation for it or something like that, people always appreciate props. So keep that in mind, and give people credit where credit is due. And then if you're using any kind of issue tracker, like GitHub issues or Atlassian or Asana or something like that, then you should include a link to the relevant issue or ticket as well. So that later on, when you're going through your commits, you can go and figure out, oh, yeah, this fixed this issue. Code reviews are really important. It's a way for you as the person who reviews the code to learn how other people solve problems. And it's a way for you as the person being reviewed to also learn how other people solve problems and to improve your own code by looking at your mistakes from someone else's perspective. So if you work in a team, I really recommend doing this. And if you do, I have a few tips that might help you. First one is to use tools that kind of are made for this. If you're using GitHub, it's pretty obvious. The pull request system is basically made for code reviews. So someone goes and writes some code, either in their own branch or against the master branch, and then they submit a pull request with all of their changes. What GitHub does is it gives you a nice overview of what they changed, all the files that have changed, and of course a diff view of what's changed. And then as you and that person work through the review process, any additional changes that they make will actually show up as part of that pull request. So this is really handy. Some other tools that you might want to check out are also Bitbucket, Fabricator, and there's a few others, kind of more enterprise-y solutions for this. But certainly if you're working with open source projects or even your own private repositories, GitHub is kind of a no-brainer for this. And I wanted to highlight one of my favorite GitHub features, which is that you can go and comment on a specific line. So this makes code reviews really, really easy. You don't have to like type out, on line 131, you did such and such mistake. Rather, you can go and like comment directly on the line. And that gives the person who's reading then those reviews a nice context for what's going on. One of the kind of general code review tips is that your review should be very specific. So don't say like, everything is wrong, this code will fall apart, but rather like go and point out specific problems that you may be noticing in the code. Of course, if like you try to run the code and there's a fatal error, then that's a big problem that you should point out. But most of the time when you're doing a code review, it'll be small little issues that you can easily point out. Something that's really important when you're doing code reviews is not to point the finger, not to blame the person that you're reviewing. So one way that I do that personally when I'm reviewing my teammates' code is I never use the word you. So I never say you wrote a bad function. I always say this function could be improved such and such way. And it might sound small, but it makes a big difference to the person who's reading it because they feel that you're trying to improve the code and not saying that they did something wrong. So this language is important when you're doing feedback. And then another thing that I do is always pad the critical or negative feedback with something positive, either before or after. So I'll say something like, cool, thanks for putting this together. It looks really good overall. I have a few small notes about what could be improved, and then I'll say like, this function doesn't respect such and such code standard or whatever. Pair programming, if you have the opportunity to experience it, is a really good way to learn and advance the project forward. This can be done in person, but it can also be done online through tools like Screen Hero. What pair programming is basically two people, sometimes more, although that gets a bit janky, working on a project together and trying to solve a problem together. So it's not really a code review, but you're kind of bouncing off of each other constantly. And you get, I would say, even more value out of that process than you would out of a regular code review. Of course, you can't always write your code as pair programming. But I think that especially as you're kickstarting a project or kind of working on bigger problems, this is a really powerful technique to use. As part of your code review process, you should automate as many things as possible. So if you can, use linters, which are basically automated tools that'll go and check the code for coding standards. So things like stray commas in JavaScript or missing space before parentheses in PHP or something like that. For PHP, there's a great project called PHP-CS, and it has a WordPress rule set that has been shepherded by someone in the community that you can use, and it'll go and actually check your code against the WordPress coding standards. So that's really, really handy. As much as possible, you should be writing unit and integration tests for your code. This makes it so that as you add new code or fix a bug, you can actually go and see if there's been a regression against your original code or whatever you're adding. This is more of a personal preference thing, but I like to use IDEs, which are integrated developer environments. I specifically use PHP Storm. And PHP Storm kind of has some of these tools built into it. So if I don't know, omit a semicolon at the end of a line of code, it'll highlight it in big red, like a big red box. And basically, I'll know that I'm doing something wrong. And it'll actually tell you there what you're doing wrong. And then it also has things like auto-completion throughout the whole project. And you can actually click and navigate the code from one function to the other. So some people prefer the simplicity of a regular code editor. But if you haven't tried one yet, I recommend you try an IDE like PHP Storm or NetBeans or something similar to kind of get a feel for this, because it kind of automates some of this code review process for you. And if you implement kind of all of these things, then it makes the code review process really easy because you're not looking at the nitty-gritty details of like, hey, is there a space before every parentheses or whatever. You can just look at the bigger picture and comment on what the code is actually doing and how it's structured as opposed to the specific minute errors that someone might be making. So in conclusion, you should do your job. Basically, a lot of these things encompass what we should be doing as developers. I highly recommend that you don't take shortcuts and try to just do things quickly. Of course, that's not always possible. I'm talking from an idealist point of view. But when you kind of help others do their job, then it kind of helps the greater developer community as a whole. So we're in this together, and we should educate and watch out for each other as much as possible in the community. So a great way to do that is by doing code reviews. Yeah, that's all I have. I'm kind of interested to know what some of you might be doing to enforce code quality within your projects or whatever you may be working on, or if you have experience with some of these things that I've talked about. Kind of interested to hear that. And if you want to email me, you can do so here, and that's my Twitter handle if you want to follow me, or tell me how bad my presentation was in a DM. That's fine.
It won't say you.
What's that?
It won't say you.
Yeah, don't say me. Just say, this presentation could have used less curly braces. Anyone have any questions or comments they want to add? Yeah? Automatic unit testing?
Automated.
So the question was, do I know of any tools to automate unit testing? Definitely the kind of most popular framework for unit testing in the PHP and WordPress world is PHP unit. That's, of course, to test PHP. There's JS unit for JavaScript side, but I won't really talk about that. And so you can, whatever process you have for deploying your code, you can pretty easily add running PHP unit tests to that process. You could do that with a Git pre-commit hook. You could do that through a continuous delivery system like Travis CI or Circle CI or any of those continuous integration systems. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Or? Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Really the IDEs they use for
Yeah.
PHP. I'm amazed because I use Visual Studio.
OK.
Is it similar for the PHP, the one that you use, and is it open source?
PHP Storm is not open source. However, there's others that are. NetBeans, Komodo are two that come to mind that are open source. And yes, I mean, the general idea of it is that it's kind of similar to Visual Studio. I'm not super familiar with Visual Studio, so I can't talk about specifics. But the general idea is kind of you have everything in one place. So you can run your code, you can interact with databases, you can even run your version control directly from PHP Storm. It kind of has all the tools you need to work on a project directly built into that.
Visual Studio is the front end, you can drag and drop controls and all.
Yeah, you wouldn't really do that in PHP because it's not a visual language, so it doesn't have that. But it does have something for graphing out your how your different PHP classes interact with each other. And it also has something similar for database interactions. So kind of interesting. Did you have a question, sir? No? Oh, sorry. Anyone else? Cool. Well, I'll be at the pub. Happy to keep talking about this over a few beers. And I'll give the floor to Gary to talk about automatic updates. Right?
Yes, I am.
Cool.
Plugin auto updates. How many people noticed the WPSEO auto update last week? Few people. There was, what else was this week? There was pods and WP all importer happened as well. So there've been a few plugin auto updates in the last few days. So for the last nearly 12 months now, not quite, we've been doing security auto updates for WordPress core. And we've just started doing it for plugins as well. The functionality's always existed, we just haven't really used it. We did one for 3.7, yeah. So ever since the update stuff has existed. So we did one for Jetpack about 6 months ago, but nothing really since then. WPSEO is probably the most visible one we've done amongst people who aren't quite sure about the whole auto update thing. So I kind of wanted to see what people's feelings were on the idea and answer any questions. Yeah.
I had one of my sites go down.
Yep.
Straight after the WPSEO update.
Yep.
My host pinpointed back to that causing a conflict. So we moved the plugin to a different folder and actually restored it. So I'm just wondering if that happened to other people or if that was something the host was telling you was.
We are aware of that particular update causing some issues. I don't know exactly what the problem was there. The entire process is in its infancy still, so we are still working to fix up. It's a very small percentage. It's, I think for WPSEO we're looking at about there's 2 or 3 zeros, 1%. So you're kind of unlucky there. I'm sorry that it happened to you, but it is a very, very small percentage of people that is happening to. And to compare to the last WordPress core security update, 4.1.1, that had 1 site that failed. So we're out of, in the first 24 hours, about 5 million. So we were happy with those stats, and plugins will get there very quickly as well. It's really just we learn from these things and add extra sanity checking. But I expect that within 12 months, plugins will be as good as that. Will be basically no one.
If you guys are releasing the update, does that mean that you are tweaking the plugin, or you're relying on, so Yoast, for example, with the WPSEO, and you're relying on them to make the updates, and then you're just pushing it out to everybody?
So yeah, so the idea is we really want to work with plugin authors. They write the security update, and then we authorize it to go out. We're figuring out ways to make it a bit faster. At the moment, it's a very manual process. The plugin author informs us that there's an issue, that they have a patch. We review the patch. We then enable it on the API to say this plugin is good for auto-updating only for very specific versions. We don't say, if you're running version 2 of a plugin, it won't update you to version 3. It will update you from 2.0.1 to 2.0.2 or 3.1.1 to 3.1.2. We're not doing major updates. For example, just today, WP e-commerce, WooCommerce, I get them mixed up, released a security update. It was a fairly minor issue, so we probably wouldn't have done an auto update for it anyway. However, their patch for that update was quite large. It wasn't just for the security fix. It had some other bug fixes and that kind of thing in it as well. So that wouldn't have been a candidate for auto updates. We only auto update if it has just the security fix, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, with WooCommerce, I got a notice from emails on a security update, but I
Yep.
didn't update it because managing that client as SEO client, so
Yep.
I didn't want to do anything. So you say it's minor? You don't
It's a minor update. Like it has the security fix and a few other bug fixes, and the security issue itself is quite minor. However, of course, with any security issue, of course, recommend updating. Certainly test it in a staging environment, but I wouldn't expect, from my brief reading of the patch, I wouldn't expect any issues.
Do you rely on the cron to be running for sites? I know that's some automatic updates might occur if the site's not always got traffic going to it.
Yes. So what it is every 12 hours, your WordPress site connects to WordPress.org and asks if there are updates. Updates for WordPress core, updates for plugins, and updates for themes. And so that's part of the cron in that, which is triggered by visitors. So if your site doesn't get any visitors, then it won't get any updates. For severe security issues, we do a couple of things. Over the leading 12 hours, we update the API to say, to tell all sites that connect to it to recheck at a particular time, so that we know that every site is going to check for an update as soon as we release it. So for severe security updates, we update every WordPress site within an hour. For any that haven't checked in because they don't have visitors, so their cron isn't triggered, we're also able to just go through and ping those sites to trigger their cron. It's basically the same thing as you would do with a bot to look at a bunch of websites. We don't really do anything more special than that.
I use managed WordPress hosting for most of my sites.
Yep.
So most of the themes and plugins are updated automatically as part of that service. I assume that they're updated and realize it's WordPress for update.
It depends on the service.
So I guess my question about is if you have any hosting experience that don't comply with the process?
Let's see, I'm not sure who does and doesn't use auto update. I'm fairly certain WP Engine does not. I don't know about any of the others.
Yeah, I don't think they do. They use their own.
They use their own update system. SiteGround is opt-in. My problem is there. While it works for their business, it's not a great security practice. These days, it's possible to scan every website on the internet for a vulnerability within about 8 hours. This is not even a difficult thing to do. You spin up a bunch of Amazon AWS instances and just have them hammer on a huge list of every website. So the idea that even waiting 8 hours, even clicking updates, waiting until you check your site in the morning, it's too long. Your site can be hacked in that time. So this is part of why we see auto updates for core as being very important, and why in the future it'll be like all plugins that have a security update will be auto updated. At the moment, it's a very careful selection and a manual process. In the future, then it will be much more, as soon as a security release is presented by a plugin author, we'll be able to push it out immediately. That's kind of the architecture that we're working on.
Just curious, do you know how many people you push the WP or the WordPress SEO out to?
I do. We don't share those numbers. Actually, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head even, so I can't even imply how many it was. Yeah. Yes, I don't recall exactly how many of the people who are affected by the issue have updated to a secure version.
But do you look back a certain number of versions for the plugin, or is it just if you're running something that's a year old, too bad?
So it depends upon, again, this is a case-by-case basis. It depends upon the plugin, it depends upon the popularity of the older versions, it depends upon the popularity of the plugin. WP All Importer was the one that we updated today. We only updated the latest version for that because it was, I think, about 20,000 installs. Whereas at the other end of the scale, Jetpack, which we did 6 months ago, we did 9 versions. We did it was all of the ones that had an issue. It was from, I think it was like 2.8 back to 1.9, around about that. And so so the Jetpack team created patches for every single one of those versions just for the security fix, and we pushed out auto updates specific for those versions. So again, it's a case-by-case basis. We're not diving headfirst into this. It's very much taking it slowly and making sure we get it right.
You have cases where you distinguish between a security update and a non-security update. You could have a manual, different choice of a manual update.
So we won't be doing auto updates for non-security releases in the foreseeable future. Possibly further in the future. You look at Chrome, for example, where it auto updates all of your plugins, all of your Chrome extensions, regardless of what kind of update it is. And that's definitely a model that we're considering for WordPress, but not in the near future.
You can opt into them, though.
You can opt in. I wrote a plugin for that. You install the plugin, you click the buttons to opt into plugin and theme auto updates, and it'll just keep your site entirely auto updated. I know people who do that and have not had a problem. So it's partially there's a thing of carefully choosing your plugins.
You've got sort of a bit of a complicated integration or something like that, I think would worry me in automatic.
Yes, if you've got a complicated system, then you probably don't want to opt into automatic updates of major versions. But I think it's a thing to look as being the ideal situation that you can opt in and trust that it'll be safe.
A little off topic, but are there any tools you recommend to auto ping sites? So we can get this hit the button for.
I don't have any in particular. We just wrote a little script to go through and just request the head of each site, and that automatically triggered the cron. It doesn't really, if you're able to write a for loop and a head request, then it's not a complex problem. I think there are services that will do that, and I would imagine that any of the services that check your site for uptime will, as a side effect, trigger the cron. There we go. So that's kind of the deal with auto updates at the moment. We're certainly interested in more feedback. If you're a plugin author and you do happen to come across a security issue, or you have something reported to you by a security researcher, then please contact us, either plugins@wordpress.org or security@wordpress.org, or both. And we're totally happy to work with you to get that auto update pushed out so that all of your users are safe and secure. Your users are our users. We want everyone to be secure. I had something else, but it doesn't matter. Again, just like Joey, I'm going to be over at the pub later, so if you have more questions, I'm more than happy to chat about it in more detail. Thank you.